All right, so good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today's 3 and 30. My name is Katie Domrat. I am the Adult Programs Coordinator here at VMFA, and today it is my pleasure to welcome my colleague Madeleine Dugan, the VMFA Curatorial Assistant and contributor to the Willie Anne Wright exhibition currently on view here at VMFA, to do this month's 3 and 30 based on this exhibition. So with that, I will pass it off to you, Madeleine.
So first of all, I wanted to thank Dr. Kennel for allowing me to take part in working on this exhibition, Willie Anne Wright, Artist and Alchemist, as well as for mentoring me, and also for the partnership of Kate Kolesny, our photo archivist, who also worked very intensely on this project with us. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Kennel's exhibition, Along Art, Photography in the American South since 1845, which is currently on view at the High Museum, and will be coming here to VMFA opening October 5th, 2024. So I recommend you check that out when it opens. So without further ado, let's jump into today's 3 and 30. First, I wanted to give a quick background on Willie Anne Wright herself. She was born in Richmond in 1924 and was raised here in Virginia as well. And I had the pleasure of meeting her this past June at her 99th birthday party. She received her bachelor's at William and Mary in psychology and later on earned her MFA at Richmond Professional Institute, which is now known as Virginia Commonwealth University. She wrote her master's thesis on the image of woman in mid-20th century painting, and throughout her life, she has been a champion of women artists, especially her contemporary peers. She holds a deep knowledge of art history, particularly 19th century Victorian artists like Julia Margaret Cameron, William Henry Fox Talbot, Oscar Gustav Rylander, and Nadar, all photographers that I just listed. Along with Wright's interest in 19th century art history, she is also interested in Victorian period in general, particularly fascinated with the culture and artifacts left behind, like family photographs and women's clothing. While I touch on all of this today, it will be done through the particular lens of the Victorian language of flowers. Floriography, or the language of flowers, was developed during the Victorian era as a way of assigning meaning to individual flowers, which you would then give a friend or suitor to express love, desire, friendship, or even disdain. The first recognized book that published the language was Le Langage des Fleurs in 1819, illustrated by Pancras Bessa, written by Charlotte de la Tour, which was a pen name for Louise Henriette Cortambert. Dozens of editions were published thereafter in different languages, sometimes mistranslating or reassigning meanings to flowers, depending on the language or where the books were published. An example of one such variation would be the popular version written by Kate Greenaway, also illustrated by her, in 1884. The language itself was developed through a variety of means. Some meanings came from folklore, mythology, like daffodils, coming from the tale of Narcissus in Greek mythology, which then assigned the attribute of self-absorption to the daffodil. Some came from the physical look of the plants. For example, walnuts look like brains, thus symbolizing intelligence, and others were developed over time. Becoming familiar with the language of flowers was a popular pastime among all classes, especially women, and it allowed people to be secretly emotional with each other in a society that was quite socially conservative, proper, and didn't really outwardly express their feelings. Flowers allowed people to share their feelings without having to speak. And throughout art history as well, flowers have served as symbols and provide deeper meaning in art. And this was emphasized in artworks made during the Victorian era, particularly by the pre-Raphaelites. So as I mentioned, Willie Anne Wright wrote her thesis on the image of women in mid-20th century painting, and she was heavily inspired by pop art, which you see here. And many of us think about Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, male artists as like the key figures in pop art. But because of this exhibition, we're really trying to highlight Willie Anne Wright's importance and other women as well in the pop art movement. So hopefully more scholarship will be done on this in the future. So as I said, she's keenly aware of women's image throughout the expanse of art history as a whole. So it's no coincidence that she's exploring the subject of the Venus de Medici, one of the most famous images of women in all of art history. Its image appears as a repeated motif throughout Wright's early work. In the center of this painting, as well as repeated throughout the background, we see a morning glory. Morning glories are a perennial flower you're probably familiar with. They're all over Richmond. They are the flower of the birth month of September. They bloom in the mornings and die the same day, hence their common name, though there are some species that only bloom at night. Wright also has a fantastic sense of humor, so she might have also been entertained by the underlying innuendo in the flower's common name as well. Something that seems to be a theme in Wright's work is her interest in the mystical properties of plants. Morning glories in particular actually produce seeds that, if taken in large doses, can produce similar effects to LSD. And they were at one point used by Aztec priests due to their hallucinogenic properties. The plant has been used in Chinese medicine as a diuretic for kidneys, and in some cultures, they are used to induce labor in pregnant women. According to Kate Greenaway's Language of Flowers, as well as many others, morning glories symbolize affectation, so behavior that's artificial and designed to impress, pretense, false display of feeling, essentially putting on airs. In other floriographies, the pink morning glory in particular stands for sweetness and affection, as well as undying or unrequited love. So there are a lot of contradicting different meanings that are now being assigned to this flower. So knowing this, we see Wright posing this flower with so many different connotations, along with a symbol of womankind, the Venus, and femininity, which can lead us to think that maybe she's trying to convey the similarities between the flower and women. Much like the symbolic meaning of morning glories, we as women are expected to be approachable and sweet, though we can also be dangerous, and often we have to put on a show to appease the feelings of others, in the process disregarding our own. And this duality of meaning of the morning glory, as well as the duality of women, is reflected by the twin imagery we see here in the double Venus, which is repeated throughout her work. As you see in Gemini Face to Face, which is another part of the series that she did, and it is currently on view at Candela Gallery in Conjuring the Composition, the other exhibition on Willie Anne Wright here in Richmond. And that is closing on the 6th, so this Saturday. So if you haven't checked it out, go check it out ASAP. It's a beautiful, beautiful exhibition. So this duality of the meaning of the morning glory is represented in the twin imagery, and Willie Anne Wright is a Gemini herself. So this is another play on the twin imagery. She really liked it because she herself is a Gemini. And the motif of morning glories is clearly something she enjoyed playing with, as you can see here in this exhibition brochure for one of her shows on the left, as well as this delightful sketch of a lady in a morning glory cape. So the next piece is Not Forgotten, Coffin Point, St. Helena's Island, South Carolina, young man with a high collar. In 1972, Wright took a photograph class at VCU with the intent that she would be able to document her paintings. However, she fell in love with the medium of photography, and she continued to work with it as the majority of her practice for the rest of her career. And she became a pioneering figure in the world of pinhole photography. So here we have a work from the series Channeling the Past. And as Dr. Kennel has stated, the Southern landscape is a repository for memory and loss. And we see Wright playing on that notion here with this really haunting photograph featuring Coffin Point, an old plantation located in South Carolina. So you can imagine how many ghosts lie within the grounds of a plantation in the southern United States. And Wright herself is very interested in the Victorian practice of spirit photography, which she evokes with the ghostly wisps of lily petals surrounding a portrait of this young man. In the Victorian language of flowers, lilies represent purity and modesty, as well as femininity, innocence, and sorrow. The Western world tends to see this particular flower as the flower of death, representing grief and being used at funerals, though it's also the official flower of 30th anniversaries, so take that how you will. We see this idea of purity and mourning again in this photograph on the left of Gracie with a dress, where we have a child's christening gown and lily laid over top of a child's headstone with the name Gracie. So the lily here can represent the purity of a child whose life has been lost so young, and serves as the manifestation of mourning like you would see at a funeral home with lilies honoring the dead. When we think about loss, the cycle of life and death, and consider what it is that we leave behind, there are often family heirlooms that get passed down through the generations. And one of the most direct ways of preserving memory is through photography. So what we see here in the daguerreotype that's been photographed in Not Forgotten Coffin Point is how Willie Anne Wright uses these photographs as a kind of prop or a centerpiece in her photographs, which look like collages, much like the Victorian scrapbooks and photo albums that were popular during the period. So Victorian albums were very popular during Victorian times. In the 1800s, the automatic printing press and the process of color printing were both invented, which allowed for more decorative paper products and stationery to become more widely disseminated and accessible to the general public, who could now afford them. Women would take these die-cut paper products and incorporate them into scrapbooks, which could lay out on a table when guests came over, and this would allow the hostess to show off their personalities, wit, and artistic talents by displaying their scrapbook compositions for viewers, and they served as conversation starters at social gatherings. Oftentimes, these scrapbooks or albums incorporated photography via photo collage, as we see in this page in the Madame B album at the Art Institute of Chicago on the left. Willie Anne Wright was very interested in combining Victorian memorabilia to mimic pages in Victorian scrapbooks, which she actually scanned. So this image on the left is a scan that Willie Anne Wright took that is now in our archives that are housed in VMFA's library. So we see Wright has taken this pre-existing language of lily symbolism from the language of flowers to emphasize the haunting feel of her works in the Channeling the Past series. This is our last piece that I'll discuss today. It is judgment. So On the left here, we see a photogram that Wright made of the artist Pamela Colman Smith. She was a British artist, writer, editor, occultist, and suffragette who illustrated the 1909 Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck, which we see on the right here. And this is actually Willie Anne Wright's own personal tarot cards. The Rider-Waite-Smith deck had imagery inspired by Christian symbolism and Arthurian legends. Having moved to Jamaica with her family when she was 10, Pamela Colman Smith was also popularly known for illustrating the Anansi stories, which was a compendium of Jamaican folktales that are still well known today. She's a fascinating woman, and I encourage people to read up on her. There's a really good catalog that came out on her recently. Having been born and initially raised in England, Smith's style is aligned with the British arts and crafts movement, which Willie Anne Wright was also inspired by, as we can see in her use of William Morris paper to wrap her own pinhole camera, as well as to back her photograph, one of which is in the exhibition itself. And it's also, when you walk into the exhibition, you can see the wallpaper is used on the wall as well to honor her interest in it. In her series, Channeling the Tarot, an homage to Pamela Colman Smith, Wright brought in the 22 major arcana cards to bring to life this plant here. This is Bobo, as Wright fondly called it. It was a Brugmansia plant, which is native to tropical climates of South America, though they are now commonly cultivated around the world as ornamental plants. Brugmansia is closely related to mysticism and shamanistic history due to its categorization in the nightshade family because of its deadly toxicity that causes delirium, hallucinations, and sometimes leads to death. In some cultures in South America, shamans would smoke the leaves to induce psychedelic experiences, believed to allow people to commune with the dead. As with morning glories, I'm sure Wright was fascinated by the deadly aspect of the plant, as well as its mystic origins. Due to its origins in South America, the plant was not native or accessible in Europe, where the language of flowers originated, and therefore does not have an official meaning in any Victorian anthologies on the language of flowers. The closest relation would be in Latour and Greenaway's versions discussing a close relationship between Brugmansia and the Jimson weed plant, which stood for deceitful charms. And though this plant is not associated with any particular symbolism, Wright made her own connection between the plant's common name, angel's trumpet, and the card of judgment, which displays an angel blowing a trumpet that calls the dead to wake from their coffins. By aligning the Brugmansia buds with the tarot, Wright assigns the meaning of each card to the plant as well. The card of judgment is associated with the rebirth and renewal, which works well with the Brugmansia's ability to commune with the dead, emphasizing this idea of rebirth. Similarly, in her piece, The Hanged Man, Wright ripped the Brugmansia buds into strips to mimic the man in the card. And the Hanged Man in tarot's meaning can vary depending on how you pull the card. So if you pull it upright, you see it here on the left. As you see it here on the left, it means you feel trapped, in need of release, or you feel like you have a lack of direction. If it's flipped the other way, fully reversed, it means discontentment, apathy, and detachment. So as we see with this piece, Wright is recreating the meaning of the language of flowers. She's reassigning and creating her own language of flowers. and mythologies surrounding the Brugmansia flower, therefore founding her own language in a contemporary setting. So thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and thank you so much, Madeleine, for this great presentation. And we hope to see you at 3:30 next month.